The year was 878 AD. Along the craggy coast of what would one day be called England, the small village of Oakhaven nestled precariously between the churning gray sea and the ancient, whispering forest. For generations, the villagers had lived a life of simple toil and profound faith. Their days marked by the rhythm of the tides and the gentle peal of the church bell. Ilada, with her hands calloused from weaving and her spirit as bright as the morning sun, often found herself gazing out at the horizon. She saw not just the endless expanse of water, but the promise of distant lands, a silent yearning she rarely spoke aloud. Her younger sister Lyra, on the other hand, saw only the beauty of the familiar, her laughter echoing through the narrow streets as she chased the village children. One crisp autumn morning, a different kind of shadow fell upon Oakhaven. It began as a faint speck on the horizon. Too low for a cloud, too dark for a fishing boat. Old man Hemlock, his eyes keen despite his years, was the first to gasp. "Dragon ship!" he croaked, his voice raw with a terror that instantly silenced the bustling market square. Panic rippled through the village like a stone dropped in a still pond. The silhouette grew distinct and terrifying. The long, sleek hull, the single, great sail emblazoned with an ominous design. And most horrifying of all, the carved dragon's head at the prow, its gaping maw seemingly ready to devour the very air. These were the ships of the Norsemen, the Northmen, the Vikings. Their name alone was a whispered prayer for protection, a harbinger of fire and blood. The village elder, Father Alaric, a man whose faith had always been his shield, now stood pale and trembling. "To the church!" he cried, his voice barely a whisper against the growing roar of the waves and the dreadful, rhythmic thud of oars. "Pray for mercy." Ilara clutched Lyra's hand, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Lyra, usually so fearless, was wide-eyed with fear, her small hand clammy in Ilara's. "Sister, what is it?" she whimpered, her gaze fixed on the approaching vessel. "Run, Lyra! To the woods, hide!" Ilara urged, pushing her sister towards the familiar path that led into the dense tree line behind their humble cottage. But it was too late. The longship, propelled by powerful oarsmen, was already cutting through the last stretch of water. The sound of wood scraping against the shingle beach was a sound that would forever haunt the villagers of Oakhaven. Then came the roar, not the roar of the sea, but the guttural, chilling cry of men, warriors, barbarians, as the monks called them. They leapt from the ship clad in leather and iron, wielding axes and swords that gleamed ominously in the weak morning light. Their faces were fierce, bearded, and utterly without mercy. The terror that had rippled through Oakhaven now became a tidal wave. Screams erupted, men, women, children. The air filled with the clang of steel, the thud of heavy boots, and the sickening cries of those who were too slow, too weak, or too defiant. Ilara squeezed Lyra's hand tighter, pulling her sister behind a fishing net, their small bodies pressed against the rough wood of a beached boat. They watched, horrified, as homes were set ablaze, their straw roofs igniting like tinder. The familiar smell of wood smoke was quickly replaced by the acrid stench of burning thatch and something else, something metallic and dreadful. The Vikings moved with brutal efficiency, their eyes scanning for anything of value: silver, food, and most terrifyingly people, especially the women. Ilara saw one of the Norsemen, a towering figure with a braided beard and an axe stained dark, stride towards a group of cowering women near the church. His eyes, cold and assessing, swept over them. A knot of dread tightened in Ilara's stomach. She knew with chilling certainty what their fate might be. The whispered tales, once dismissed as distant nightmares, now materialized into a horrifying reality before her very eyes. Lyra whimpered, burying her face in Ilara's side. Ilara held her close, her gaze fixed on the scene of unfolding destruction, a desperate prayer forming on her lips, not for rescue, for she knew none would come, but for a strength she wasn't sure she possessed, a strength to protect her sister from the unspeakable things that now threatened their very existence. The sanctuary of the beached fishing boat lasted only moments. A guttural shout, a flash of movement, and suddenly a hulking figure stood over them. He was immense, his face framed by a wild, red beard and his eyes like chipped ice, fixed on Ilara and Lyra. Ilara tightened her grip on her sister, trying to make their small forms as inconspicuous as possible, but it was futile. The Viking grunted, a sound that sent a fresh wave of terror through Ilara. He reached down, his massive hand closing around Ilara's arm with a grip that felt like iron bands. She cried out, a sharp, involuntary sound. Lyra, startled, looked up, and the Viking's gaze shifted to her, a predatory glint in his eye. "No," Ilara screamed, trying to pull Lyra closer, to shield her. But the man was too strong. He tore them apart with shocking ease. Lyra let out a piercing shriek as another, equally large warrior seized her. Ilara lunged, scratching, kicking, fighting with a primal ferocity she didn't know she possessed. But a brutal blow to the side of her head sent stars exploding behind her eyes. She crumpled, the world tilting precariously. When her vision cleared, she was being dragged across the shingle, her arm still held in the vice-like grip of the red-bearded Viking. Her head throbbed and a metallic taste filled her mouth. She could hear Lyra's desperate cries, fading slightly as they were pulled in different directions. Panic, cold and absolute, gripped her heart. "Lyra!" she screamed, her voice raw. She saw her sister, struggling weakly in the arms of another Norseman, being herded towards the longship. Lyra's tear-streaked face was a picture of pure despair, her small hands reaching out, begging for Ilara. "Please!" Ilara pleaded with her captor, tears streaming down her face. "My sister, don't separate us." The Viking merely grunted again, his face impassive. He shoved her roughly towards a growing group of women and children, all similarly captured, their faces etched with fear and grief. They were bound together with rough ropes, their wrists chafing. Ilara's eyes darted around, searching for Lyra, but her sister was nowhere in sight among the huddled, weeping figures. The separation was swift, cruel, and absolute. The air was thick with smoke and the cries of the dying. The screams of resistance had largely subsided, replaced by the mournful wails of the captured and the triumphant shouts of the raiders. The Vikings moved with systematic efficiency, loading their plunder onto the longship, sacks of grain, precious metals ripped from the church and the living captives. Ilara felt a rough hand push her forward. She stumbled, falling to her knees in the sand, but was immediately yanked back up. The longship loomed before them, its dragon head seeming to mock their plight. The gangplank was already down, and the first of the captives were being forced aboard. As she was pushed up the gangplank, her eyes desperately scanned the faces around her. She saw the village women she had known all her life, the baker's wife, the weaver, young mothers clutching their infants, all shared the same vacant, terrified expression. And then at the far end of the ship, near the stern, a small, familiar figure, Lyra. She was huddled against the wooden rail, her face still streaked with tears, her eyes wide with uncomprehending horror. Their eyes met across the chaos, a silent plea passing between them. A desperate, fleeting hope sparked in Ilara's chest. At least they were on the same ship. But the hope was quickly overshadowed by the crushing weight of their predicament. The roar of Viking longships, once a distant horror, was now the sound of their impending doom. As more captives were forced aboard, the ship began to settle in the water, creaking under its grim new cargo. Ilara felt the cold spray of the sea on her face, and the distant shores of Oakhaven, now a smoking ruin, began to shrink behind them. Her home was gone, her freedom was gone, and the unspeakable journey had only just begun.